who created this hatred of Hindus? When did it start? And why was this done? These were the central questions in my mind, and these are the results of my research. When was it done? The first record I've been able to find of Hinduphobia, hatred of Hindus, is 1813, and I'd be grateful if you could remember that. 1813 was the year when the East India Company had been in place for over 200 years. In that period, it had extracted huge, vast fortunes, and England had a ruling class who were, shall we say, they had so much wealth that they had to create offshore havens to conceal it. Obscene levels of wealth, especially when you consider that it was the fruits of rape, pillage, theft, and asset stripping from India. Up until 1813, the Church of England had no authority or permission to go to India, and they felt excluded. They desperately wanted to get their missionary activity in India. They wanted evangelism to start in India, and they tried to find ways in which they could make it happen. They tried several times to get the charter of the East India Company changed to allow them to visit India and to start their evangelical missions and to become established there. But they failed repeatedly. The East India Company was quite conscious that they didn't want to disrupt the, shall we say, the way in which the Hindu community was functioning. They were very happy to have the Hindus working away and have the British taking the assets out. They did not want to disrupt their slave force. And that's pretty much what it was. So the East India Company resisted all of the efforts of William Wilberforce at that point in time. Lord Liverpool said in the House of Lords, community discord is bad for business. And so the Church of England was initially denied access. But it needed and wanted access. It was not going to allow such an incredible source of wealth to perhaps be kept away from it. And so it ramped up its pressure. It started to work out a strategy. And by March of 1813, Parliament was being lobbied by the Church. It was being lobbied by representatives within Parliament, members of the Church who were very much attached to the idea that the Church should spread its wings into India, but not particularly successfully. And so in order to create more pressure on the Parliament, a movement started. And what this movement was actually a grassroots movement. The various evangelical missions, all of whom were excluded, they started to coordinate their impact. They started to press upon the parliamentarians that there was a natural mission for them to civilize the heathen. But it was all pretty much resisted right the way through to March 1813. And then it became probably one of the most prominent subjects of conversation in Parliament in that year. Many people who had been to India, who knew what the Hindus were like, Lord Hastings was an example. He said, the Hindus are gentle, benevolent, more susceptible of gratitude for kindness shown to them, and as exempt from the worst propensities of human passion as any people on the face of the earth. So this is a civilization which he appreciated, that the members of this civilization were gentle, they were civilized. And so whatever society existed at that time, it created people who were living together in the most civilized of manners, and the Christian Church of England and the British East India Company were fully aware of this. So there were a few attempts to try and impress upon parliamentarians that there should be a religious dimension to it, and they weren't particularly successful. And so Wellesley, Lord Wellesley, came up with a scheme. And he was aware that if religion was pushed, the Hindu will reject it. And so his idea was, let's merge religion with education, which Hindus love. And that was the first genesis of a deceitful program being created and sculpted. But even then, at the end of March, there was no progress, and the evangelicals were beginning to despair. But something else happened then. What they started to do was to actually start to approach the people of the country. They started to lobby the British population to allow the church to continue its mission into India, even though the East India Company had rejected it, and even though the parliamentarians had said, we don't want this to happen, it will disturb a source of incredible revenue and wealth. 22nd of June, a few months after March, when the first resolution was attempted in the House of Lords, Lord Montgomery then said, "The moral character of the Hindu is a great deal better than that of the people of this country, who at present only gave an example of lying, swearing, drunkenness, and other vices." This was at the beginning of the debate. William Wilberforce stood up to speak, and William Wilberforce spoke for an extraordinarily long time. And in his talk, what he did was to start to seed the direct hatred and contempt for Hindus. He spoke for over an hour and a half, I believe it was, and in that time he started to preach the mantra of how terrible the Hindus were. He started to speak about the depraved conditions of the Hindus, and a rhetoric was being constructed that the Hindus were in such dire straits because of their diabolical and demonic religion that they had to be saved. The white savior mentality was carefully being sculpted, and the brown, heathen, pagan, vile, subhuman Hindu was also being sculpted. By the end of that month, 12th of April 1813, on that date, over 908 petitions had been presented to Parliament by the Christian population of the United Kingdom, asking parliamentarians to allow the church to save the Hindu. This was the highest number of petitions ever presented, and it was only possible because from every pulpit, from every schoolmaster's desk, the mantra had gone out that the Hindus were evil, that they were guilty of sati, that polygamy was rife, that infanticide was a fundamental part of the Hindu religion, and that idolatry was the grand abomination of the people of that country, who at present only give an example of lying, swearing, drunkenness, and other vices. The clause protecting the Indian right to freedom of religion was passed. So make a note. First we have the elevation of the Christian mission to civilize. Then we have the denigration of the Hindu. And then we introduce the third aspect, which is it's our job to save them. And to protect their freedoms, we will introduce legislation to give freedom of religion. Now, what freedom of religion really meant was freedom for the church to enter and to start proselytizing and evangelizing, to start acquiring property, to start seeding churches without constraint. And this was what William Wilberforce achieved.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.